AFC North is a lot like a dynasty league. You've got your rebuilders and you've got your contenders. And today, Jeff Bell and I, we are going to take a deep look at the AFC North, talking through all of these teams as we have done already with the AFC East and the AFC South. We've got 6 more episodes coming your way. Jeff, we are going to start today with the Baltimore Ravens, and as always, we're going to start with some of the transactions that happened this offseason to kind of set the table for what we're going to discuss here. Big changes here. We got Jesse Minter hired as the head coach and Declan Doyle coming from Chicago to be the offensive coordinator. The team lost Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kolar, DeAndre Hopkins, Tylan Wallace, and Cooper Rush in free agency. They brought in Skylar Thompson and Durham Smythe. And then in the draft, they double-tapped wide receivers, bringing in Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt. They brought in tight end Matt Hibner, and then they spent their final pick on Adam Randall, a running back that we're going to have some fun discussing in a little bit. So, Jeff, as always, we're going to start with the top here. With the quarterbacks, Lamar Jackson coming off of a down year. Injuries, of course, played a big part in that, but are you just expecting Lamar Jackson to return to form as the player that he's been for the last half decade?
I am expecting that. It's really interesting just to talk foundational, elemental about this Ravens team, because you mentioned bringing in Declan Doyle, and he did have a little bit of experience with the organization prior, but he's coming out of the Ben Johnson coaching tree, coming out of being, as you know, the Bears offensive coordinator last year. And so there's different elements here. And I think that what we've seen over the last couple of years from the Ravens, it's moving out of that. I mean, John Harbaugh obviously is gone, but it's moving out of John Harbaugh, moving out of the, why am I blanking on who was the Chargers offensive coordinator last year for
Greg Roman.
Yeah, the Greg Roman, that power offense, that run game offense. And then Todd Monken was a departure from that, but it was definitely still elements in there, a lot of 2 tight end sets. And now you're moving into the Ben Johnson tree, and there's a lot more passing in that. There's a lot more, obviously we know that there's multiple usage of the running backs, but there was a little bit more involvement in the running back. So how this all breaks down, I think it's going to be fascinating to see, because I think you talk about the personnel changes overall. I think they made personnel changes to allow them to play in a little bit more of a dynamic offense with multiple receivers on the field. And Lamar Jackson leading into that, as we move into this next stage of his career, does the rushing slow down? Does he lean more on the passing? And I think he is a better passer than many do realize when it comes down to it.
And I think it was that Todd Monken offense. That's when we saw Lamar really step up as a passer, because it was like we've seen Lamar Jackson in some very different offenses throughout his career, like where they were kind of treating him, I don't know, they just didn't really respect him. Like I'm saying the coaching staff, like the Ravens coaching staff, didn't seem to respect him as a passer. They wanted to cut the field in half. They wanted to run as much as possible. When he would throw the ball, it was usually out of the pocket on bootlegs and stuff like that. And Todd Monken was the one that was just like, we're just going to let this guy throw the ball. And then he developed into a very good pocket passer. And we're already hearing some of these Ravens players just gushing about Declan Doyle. We know this kid is very, very young. And I can say kid because he is significantly younger than both of us, Jeff. But we got a Zay Flowers quote the other day where he said, he's got stuff that I've never seen, plays and routes and stuff to help you get open. He's a genius. He wants the offense to be the best offense in the league, and that's how he's going to coach it. So, I mean, we are seeing this pretty frequently now, I feel like, over the last decade or so. It used to be this kind of club that you were either a part of or you weren't when it came to coaches, and now we've got these young kids like quickly rising through the ranks, making splashy plays on offense. We saw this not too long ago with Mike McDaniel. We saw this with Sean McVay even before that, just a couple of years ago. We saw this with Ben Johnson, and it does feel like Declan Doyle is kind of the next person to be that young guy that just takes the NFL by storm.
Well, when it really comes down to it, talking about Lamar Jackson and where you're going to value him in fantasy is he's an outlier, and he has the potential to put up statistical stat line that we've never seen before. And I think that that's the biggest thing of, yes, there can be some concern with the injuries, that is he going to get back to these levels? There's also a thought that if he stays healthy and in this new offensive scheme, does he go to a level we have just never, ever seen before? And we are getting, I think that's a very, very good ADP on him to be able to make that, because he is sitting the mid to the end of the 5th round in your one quarterback drafts, when you're getting into underdog, those types of things. And it really is the range where we feel like the sure thing running backs, the sure thing wide receivers kind of falling off the board. And you're starting to look at like a Roman Dunze's got some injury questions, or some of these other wide receivers, running backs that do have some questions, concerns around them. And I love just taking Lamar Jackson in that area and locking up and potentially having that elite league winning upside.
And I was really hoping there'd be a big discount on Lamar in drafts this year, right? Because like we saw Caleb Williams and Drake May really put it together last year. Jaden Daniels 2 years ago coming off that, hopefully being more healthy this year. I thought that we'd get some sort of discount, but you're still kind of paying up for Lamar. Like he's typically the third guy going off the board, but you're usually getting him a round and a half, 2 rounds cheaper than Josh Allen. And you talk about it, like we can still see the best of Lamar Jackson. You've mentioned a few times the 5,000 yards passing, 500 yards rushing being something that you're waiting to see a quarterback do. And I have been on the 4,000 yards passing, 1,000 yards rushing watch for the last couple of years with Lamar Jackson, and we almost saw it in 2024. He hit the 4,000 yards passing, 915 yards rushing. So now as he gets a little bit older, I think that his path to get there is a little bit narrower, but that's what I am hoping to see, because I think that would just, break fantasy football. If you can get 4,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards passing, I don't know what else needs to be said about Lamar Jackson, though. Like, he's a part of this team. We've seen him score in different ways, be it as a passer or as a rusher. We expect this to be a better offense. Is it time to just look at the wide receivers here, Jeff?
Well, I think just overall, again, you're talking about the price on Lamar Jackson. He's got, where I'm looking right now, best ball aggregate ADP of 45 overall, which is his lowest ADP since 2021. So you are getting a pretty solid discount, pretty solid price on that. And I do think it's worthwhile. We can absolutely talk about the wide receivers now.
Before we talk about the wide receivers, though, if you're watching the show on YouTube, do us a favor and give us a thumbs up, leave a comment, all the things you can do to help this show grow. We know that a 2-hour episode is a tough sell, but if you are watching this show, it means that you are one of our diehard audience members. Not a lot of people are going to see an hour 45, hour 50, 210. We don't know how long this episode's going to be, but we know it's going to be a long one. Either way, we know that it is a very tough sell to watch a video like this, so let us know that you appreciate it in the YouTube comments with a like. And of course, if you aren't subscribed, please subscribe, because we have 5 more of these episodes coming out after this one. And if you're just catching this episode for the first time, be sure to go back and watch the episodes that we came out with last week on the AFC East and the AFC South. And if you are listening on Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. Let us know what you think about the show. If you've got any ideas for show topics, anything like that, just drop that in an Apple review and we will take that to heart before week 1 kicks off. But Jeff, time to talk about the wide receivers. And I was kind of surprised when I started doing my early best ball drafts this year. I am walking away with so much safe flowers, like just almost every single draft. When I'm sitting there at the top to middle of round 3, he's typically going at the 3-4 turn. I just think that he is so undervalued this year. This guy was 6th in the league in receiving yards last year. We have seen him grow significantly in what he's able to do, winning in different levels of the field. I feel like last year, the touchdowns weren't there. And because the touchdowns weren't there, the fantasy production wasn't there. But this guy has proved that he is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, still very young, ascending in his career in what we expect to be a better offense, coming off of a big yardage season. Why aren't we talking about this guy as somebody who should be going to like the 2-3 turn rather than where he's fallen a full round later?
I think anytime you start to talk about the passing game of the Ravens, it goes back to the general belief that they're a low volume passing attack, that we haven't seen Lamar Jackson support wide receiver ones. It is, I think the ADP is fascinating on Zay Flowers, because I feel like everywhere I turn, everybody's having the same conversation about him in fantasy football of why is he going so late? He's a great value. I'm all in on Zay Flowers this year, but then it like ends up, I don't know if we're all just playing that game where we just want to be able to get him in like the late 4th, early 5th, and so we just don't take him, where, like you said, we're hypothetically should be taking him. But I mean, you start to talk about Declan Doyle coming out of the Ben Johnson tree. We know the Amon-Ra St. Brown of it all, potentially. You look at the other targets around here, and I mean, once you start to allocate, working through my projections and allocating target shares, man, I put the amount to Zay Flowers, and other than that, I mean, Mark Andrews, it feels like a good potential bounce back for him because you don't have Isaiah Likely there anymore. We know Rashad Bateman has not been practicing. And so we had the Rashad Bateman renaissance a little bit in 2024. He failed to follow that up in 2025. And now it feels like being eclipsed. You've got early day two, late day two, early day three receiver profiles and Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt, and whether or not where they can contribute there. It's a lot of questions out of this outside of Zay Flowers. And so you're exactly right there on when you're starting to look at the overall upside, and maybe there is a belief that you're drafting him at his ceiling from what he produced last year. But when you start to look at where you start to divvy up the plays, I mean, you might be drafting him at his floor for sure.
Yeah, and you say drafting him near his ceiling, and I know that you don't believe that, but I mean, this guy last year had 86 catches and only scored 5 touchdowns. Like, his expected touchdown total with the volume that he had, that should have been a 10 or 12 touchdown season, which would have been a top 6 or a top 8 fantasy season, but just a little bit of bad luck in the touchdown department, and now you're able to get him at a very cheap cost. And you talk about it, everybody says that they're like in on Zay Flowers. Well, I put my money where my mouth is. Like, just last week when I was doing that NFFC draft, I was there at the 304 and I took Zay Flowers there because when I look at the other options available, you've got Rashee Rice rehabbing a surgically repaired knee in jail. That scares me a little bit. Malik Neighbors still coming back from that ACL tear, and it doesn't seem like, things are trending in the right direction there. That scares me a little bit. Don't get me wrong, like, I like some of the other players there, but T. Higgins, like, you're banking on touchdowns as the second option there. Ladd McConkey, a very good player, and I think that he's valued appropriately, but like, what's the difference in the projection between Ladd McConkey and Zay Flowers? Like, I see Ladd McConkey, sure, the offense is a little bit better, but so much more target competition there. I just look at all of these guys that are ranked ahead of Zay Flowers, and I don't really understand why. So that's a guy that I'm willing to just, like, say, throw ADP to the wind and just go out and get him in your best ball drafts because I think he's one of the best values out there.
Yeah, I'm still working on getting my overall rankings via projections. We're going kind of one team, one division at a time, but I mean, I have Zay Flowers right now sitting at a similar level as right around. I mean, Cardell Tate, I'm pretty high on him, but right above AJ Brown with the Patriots when I'm projecting AJ Brown into the Patriots. And so that's kind of the range. And you're talking about guys going the second, the third round.
I mean, AJ Brown is creeping into round 1 in some drafts. Like, he went 111 in one of those NFFC drafts I did the other day.
Yeah, and so that's what you're kind of looking at when it comes down to where he's being drafted around there. And so I completely agree. And you casually kind of mentioned, is the Chargers offense better than the Ravens offense? I'm not sure. And this is a Ravens offense that's
a good question.
I think the path to it too, and really when you start to stack it up,
the Chargers offense always looks better on paper in the offseason. We'll say that.
Well, you can definitely make the argument it's deeper. But overall, I think the overall upside and the overall ceiling, that's a major question. But I do think when you start to talk about onslaught stacks and the way you're building these teams and the way that ADP is kind of sitting right now, it's very easy to have Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers, and still have very, very strong pieces around them, kind of as your core. And if it breaks in that direction where you're getting, like we saw in 2024, or what we've seen this offense do before with Lamar Jackson, where it just breaks in the direction that this is one of the top 5 offenses in the leagues. I think we correctly have a focus on the undervalued offense, but I think what we don't have enough focus on sometimes is the elite offense. Like we think about like the if the Titans can become like that offense that you wanted to invest in, or like the Seahawks last year, those types of things. We think a lot about that, but I don't think we think a lot about those offenses that are sitting in 5 to 10 that could put up historic numbers. And I think that when you really break it down, the Ravens are one of those teams that have that capability to do historic numbers overall. And I think that as much as you get so much value out of having the Seahawks from last year, and for sure Jackson Smith and Jigba, but having that team that was undervalued, you invested in it. Really, when you dominate leagues is when you get like the Peyton Manning 50 touchdown Broncos, where you've got cheap Demaryius Thomas
entire team and won your league.
Yes, exactly. And you're just smoking your league at that point. And it is so much different. It's such a higher level. And when you're talking about You're talking about best ball. You're talking about the top one or two teams advance out of these things. You're talking about ripping off a playoff run. I mean, the way that it's structured and what you're able to grab out of this offense at a very, very comfortable ADP is very appealing.
And if you talk about those historic offenses, I mean, just 2 years ago, the Detroit Lions, like you could have drafted Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, David Montgomery, and Jahmyr Gibbs, and that would have won you your league just having that entire core of offense, and then you follow that coaching tree from Ben Johnson down to Declan Doyle. You know, it's not going to be the same exact offense, but we can see similarities there. So we spent a lot of time talking about Zay Flowers because he really is just like tiers ahead of everybody else on this depth chart. So let's kind of lump together the wide receiver 2 conversation with the tight end conversation. Do you have it that Mark Andrews is going to be second on this team in targets? Is that kind of what you're expecting? I haven't looked at your projections yet, but knowing how your brain works, I'm guessing you got there, right?
Oh, I'm comfortably having Andrews second in targets. I mean, there's just no they
Right.
invested in some young tight ends, but there's nobody threatening Mark Andrews now that Isaiah likely is gone. I've got him just over 80 targets in my projections, and then I've kind of wasn't sure how to kind of divide up those next level receivers, and so I've got Bateman with 50 targets, and then Jacoby Lane and Elijah Surratt around 40 to 45 targets each. Kind of so Andrews comfortably the number 2 option within this offense. And I think to definitively state otherwise ignores the history of Mark Andrews and Lamar
Mm-hmm.
Jackson. It ignores the structure. It ignores Declan Doyle working in Chicago last year and Detroit previously to have the Sam Laporta, to have the Colston Loveland at the end of last year. We've seen tight ends be involved in the schemes that he's been involved with. And so I think it's to definitively say that one of these rookies that are jumbled together or Rashad Bateman's going to be healthy and clearly be the second target. I can't arrive there when I'm going to do projections. I think it's, to me, in my mind, it's clearly Andrews.
So years ago when we were doing this series, Jeff, you and I were talking about the Baltimore Ravens, and we were looking at Todd Monken joining this team, and we were talking about Georgia, how Georgia utilized Brock Bowers and Oscar Delp in this 12 personnel, and we were the one, like, nobody was talking about 12 personnel a few years ago, and you and I were saying, like, they can come out and live in base 12 personnel with Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. That's exactly what happened, and then we've seen a lot of other teams start to follow suit since. But when you see now the departure of Isaiah Likely, I mean, to me, Durham Smythe is the exact Isaiah Likely replacement, that move tight end that can play out of the slot, more of a receiver than he is an inline blocker. But I don't think that he's the level of talent as Isaiah Likely, which means fewer targets going his way, which means more targets to the other guys. So this is one of those, I use the term a lot, but addition by subtraction, like where they bring in a guy, but because it's a less talented version of what they had before, that just means more targets distributed to the guys that we actually care about.
Yeah, and you would think that this is an offense capable of running pretty pure, and that's part of
Mm-hmm.
the investment overall and grabbing the pieces of it. Because you talk about appealing ADPs, Andrews is like not even on the board. Andrews is like an
Right.
11th round pick, and so you can just slide that in through the back end. But I'm not going to say anything bad about Durham Smythe at all. His dad got mad at me once on socials, so
Forgot about that.
Durham Smythe's dad's out there listening to this. I appreciate you keeping me honest there, but no, it is you break it down though, and I mean, I think one of the thoughts here as you start to look at the pieces that are available and the way this is going, there's some profile wide receivers that are still kind of sitting out there that maybe a Stephon Diggs or maybe a Deebo Samuel might make some sense to add into this offense. So to me, it feels like if you're looking for places for a Diggs or a Samuels to land, man, Baltimore has to be considered.
And they have done that. I'm trying to. I know there was somebody else, but it was obviously
Odell
DeAndre
Beckham.
Hopkins last year. Yeah, so it was DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham, Sammy Watkins. They do bring in these like aging guys. I feel like Brandon Cooks was there for a little bit too. Maybe I'm
I don't
imagining
think
that,
Cooks
but it
was
does.
ever there.
Kenny Galladay maybe. Like I feel like they just always kind of bring in these guys like at the end of their career to kind of see what they still have left. And yeah, I think that Diggs, Debo, one of those guys would make a lot of sense. Let's talk real quickly, Jeff, about we talked about Andrews, who we expect to be the secondary weapon. So when you look at Rashad Bateman, who, like you said, dealing with an injury right now, Jacoby Lane, drafted just a little bit ahead of Elijah Surratt, but they have very similar profiles. I find myself at the end of drafts, everybody has the shiny new toy syndrome where they want to go out and get the Jacoby Lane and the Elijah Surratt. I find myself in round 18 when Rashad Bateman's sitting there like, hey, why can't Rashad Bateman have a Gabe Davis type of season where he has 450 yards and 8 touchdowns? Because like that's what he does. So like a guy that in my dynasty leagues don't care about. Managed leagues, I'm not going to be drafting, but round 20 in best ball, sign me up.
We were going hard on the Ravens in 2024, and I know that
Mm-hmm.
we were hitting that Bateman, that last-ish round Bateman, quite a bit in that year. And we started out very, very hot, and we looked very, very smart. Tailed off towards the end a little bit, but he is coming off a disappointing year. He is dealing with injury. It is a jumbled room when you look at it now. Them going out there and Lane and Surratt definitely do change that conversation. I think as you're breaking them down, I mean, my initial lean is Surratt is a little bit more of an experienced receiver, a little bit more of a polished receiver, kind of wins it. Like, I think, not to discredit Jacoby Lane, but if you're breaking down like ability to understand the offense quickly, and I think that kind of leans more towards Surratt. But I think when you look at potential overall ceiling, you look at Lane. But when it comes, I mean, Bateman, we have seen him be a valuable contributor before, and that if he is able to be healthy and leading into the season, he should probably be viewed as the guy that will be on the field second most to Zay Flowers out of all the receivers.
And that's exactly where I am too. I do prefer Jacoby Lane to Elijah Surratt ever so slightly, but we've talked enough about this Ravens passing attack that I don't think we need to argue over who the fifth option might be on it. But let's talk about the running backs here, Jeff. We're betting against Derrick Henry, right? Like this is the end. He's falling off this year. He's old. He can't keep doing it. Of course, my tongue is in my cheek right now. I mean, I'm at the point now, like, I'm just going to keep drafting Derrick Henry. Like, one of these days, I'm going to get stuck holding the bag. Maybe it's this year. Maybe it's 2028. I don't care. I'm just going to keep drafting him.
Oh, absolutely. And he is that. I don't know. You're not getting quite the discount that, especially 2 years ago, that was an amazing discount that we were able to get on him because it was like regularly the third round. Now he's kind of sitting firmly in that second round, and you have to make the decision a little bit of, I mean, I don't think there's any reason why we should project meaningful increase in passing game volume for Derrick Henry. Right. But I mean, the path is certainly there for him to lead the league in rushing. And when you really start to break it down, I mean, I'm not, but some people are counting down the clock of when he is going to run out of time, more or less. But he's not that far. He's about 4 productive seasons, 4 Derrick Henry-esque seasons away from becoming the NFL's all-time leading rusher. And I know we talked about that previously when we did the running back breakdown about a month ago, but I think that is something to consider as it comes down to it. And I do think that if there were literally anybody else but like Justice Hill, if there was any bit of juice, you'd start to see some talk about like a secondary back in this and the involvement there. But I mean, I think that Justice Hill is very strong in what Justice Hill offers, and very little of what he is strong in involves him actually having the ball. And so that becomes a little bit of an issue of had they added like an Emmett Johnson or something in the draft, had they added like an elusive potential running back, you might have some really interesting conversations. They went the opposite way. They lost Keaton Mitchell. And so now you're kind of running down to it. And Adam Randall feels like a 1-for-1 substitution of Derrick Henry more so than a complementary type back.
And thank you for the housekeeping there. I did miss Keaton Mitchell at the top of the show when I was talking about the departures. Yeah, he was like the one running back that had juice in this backfield, and they let him walk. So let's just talk. Let's say this is the year that the age catches up to Derrick Henry, which I'm not expecting. I've seen pictures of this guy at minicamp. He's built like an edge rusher right now. Like he just gets bigger and bigger every single year. Like I think that he's going to be fine. But if he were to go down, do you think there's one guy here, be it Justice Hill, Rasheen Ali, or the rookie Adam Randall, that would step into that role? Or do you think that we would just kind of see a rotation without Henry?
Randall's the piece that you would want to place your chip on just because of the way that the offense would be structured. I think it would be a pretty dramatic departure to have it be Hill or Ali. I mean, we talked about potential free agent additions in the wide receiver room. I mean, realistically, if something were to happen in the summer, I mean, this would seem like a Najee Harris landing spot, to be honest, or something like that. I think that I would while I think Adam Randall would be that piece that you want to hold in that circumstance, that and I think we're framing it as Derrick Henry finds something he'd rather do just
Yes, yes.
reinvents happiness
Good
in life
vibes.
and decides he's not going to play football anymore. That then Randall's the piece right now, but I would be surprised if they didn't explore. We have seen this team be aggressive on the trade market. We know
Mhm.
that they are not strangers to adding in free agents. I think they would go out there and they would add some. It'd probably be like the Kareem Hunt, like 3.2 yards per rush, and we would all be very sad that it isn't Adam
Oh,
Randall.
Najee
But at
Harris.
this
Najee
point,
Harris
yeah,
feels like such a Raven. Like I could already see Najee in that Ravens jersey. But what I will say about Adam Randall, I mean, there is no Derrick Henry is one of one. Don't hear what I'm not saying
right.
here. Derrick Henry is one of one. But you look at Adam Randall, 6'3", 235 pounds, off the charts speed, like just a big physical imposing guy, and a little rough around the edges. He is a converted wide receiver who doesn't have a lot of vision at the line of scrimmage. He is just kind of a battering ram who finds his way to pick up a few yards here and there. But if he can break loose, like he's got the speed to rip off long plays, so could be a fun player to keep an eye on if something were to happen. But any final thoughts on the Ravens, Jeff?
Well, just a real quick Adam Randall. You mentioned the receiver background. I think the
Mm-hmm.
most fascinating path would be leaning hard into that receiver background and having him become the complementary receiver back. And so basically you're going from Derrick Henry to Adam Randall as
Right.
like the rotation there. That would be the fun way to kind of explore this. But given the talents of Justice Hill and Rashid Ali, that seems very unlikely. I think overall, again, it's very, very appealing ADPs to be able to get the key pieces of this offense. And I do think that to place that chip on another key piece outside of Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Mark Andrews, there's a lot of faith, a lot of projection that's going on there on kind of throwing it. That doesn't mean it's the wrong approach. It doesn't mean, if you're all in on Jacoby Lane or if you're all in Elijah Surratt, there's certainly opportunity here for somebody to emerge as that key other piece. But the way it breaks down, I mean, we've talked enough about the discounts that you can get on these guys.
The last thing I'll say about Adam Randall, and this is even about Adam Randall specifically, but I am kind of rethinking this take that I've spit for years about like, this converted wide receiver to running back is going to be great in the passing game. And then you look back over the last couple of years and like Tyrone Tracy, how many drops has he had? How many fumbles has he had? How many fumbles has Antonio Gibson had? I'm realizing that a lot of the times these guys were converted to running backs because they weren't good receivers, and we assume that because they weren't good receivers, they're still going to be good receiving running backs. But a lot of them do just have bricks for hands and just can't catch the ball at all. So the idea that Adam Randall is going to be a pass catching, I understand it. Like I have thought that way for a long time. But just looking at the ball skill issues that Tyrone Tracy has had over the last couple of years, it does have me slightly rethinking that idea that like the converted wide receiver to running back is going to be a good pass catcher in the NFL.
Well, but there's different skill sets is the problem.
Right.
And you're
Good route
asking
runner for
somebody
sure.
that. Well, and coming down to it, though, you're asking most often one or two situations when it comes to a running back targets. Either they're blocking and releasing, so they're picking up a blitz and then sliding off and then releasing, or they're like the screen game, and you're quickly transitioning. You're catching the ball, and you know that guys are coming at you immediately, so you're immediately transitioning from getting the catch to running back basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you don't have that natural skill and instinct of having the experience of the running back position, you don't have that natural experience of chipping, picking up that blitz, sliding off and making yourself available, or getting that screen, immediately transitioning to that. You're used to being downfield, worried about one-on-one with a defensive
Right.
back, worried about getting open in that situation, securing the catch, and so often, especially downfield, means securing the catch, then transitioning to run. It's a high level skill that if you can just get open and secure the catch, that's a massive win, especially at the NFL level. And so I think that that's what it's fundamentally we're thinking of, like, well, he's an explosive guy and like you can use him here, but the skills, the areas of the field that he's being asked to do that in is retraining and learning a new skill.
Let's move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. And this is going to sound crazy because this is the team loaded with, players that we want in fantasy football, but I don't think this is one that we need to like dive super deeply into, Jeff, because we have seen this song and dance for the last 4 or 5 years now. They really haven't changed too much. No coaching changes. They lost Noah Fant and Jake Browning this offseason. They brought in Josh Johnson, who is now on his 38th NFL team. Good for him. As far as the draft, they got Colby Young and Jack Endries on day 3. But, I mean, this is a team, one of the most consolidated, cleanest offenses in the NFL. Joe Burrow is going to give the ball to Chase Brown, T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase, and nobody else really matters.
Doing projections for this division, it's one that you're looking at different coaching schemes coming in and being implemented in the other 3 teams. You're looking at changing personnel. You're looking at how you'll divide it all up. And then when you get to the Bengals, you're like, this is the easiest projection I'm going to do all year long.
Copy, paste from 2025.
More or less, yes. It's really hard to have a major departure from that other than Joe Burrow missing time. And I think that becomes the major question on Joe Burrow. Now we've had multiple seasons where he's missed significant portions of the season. And so that the healthiness, the comments about like his happiness, like all those things factoring into there. And we talk about historic overall upside on Lamar Jackson. I mean, Burrow is one of those players that also has the potential to have a historic season. And so that this team starts and stops with Joe Burrow. We've seen they had made a lot more moves on the defensive side, but as it comes down to it, he has gotten all his pieces. Everything is set up here. You've got Chase Brown now with a full year of experience as the feature back. You have the 2 key receivers, but can Burrow be healthy and can he deliver on those expectations for a quarterback that not that long ago was in the Super Bowl and looked like the face of the league moving forward?
Right. And, I think that at this point, we're still drafting Joe Burrow where he should be, like a top 5, top 6 quarterback. The upside is there. But I think Chase Brown is one of the more interesting players because, Jeff, I don't know how many times we've said, like, we should rename this show Early Season Bias because we talk about it all the time, that people just get, like, so hung up on what happened in the first, like, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season. I don't think a lot of people realize that over the second half of the year, Chase Brown from week 8 onward, he averaged 19 points per game. Like he was the RB5 in scoring. And people do remember all of the after week 1, after week 2, after week 3, Chase Brown was the worst pick you could have made in fantasy football. I can't believe you idiot influencers talked me into drafting Chase Brown. And it was a broken offense. Like we saw early in the year, Chase Brown, it was just kind of unlucky the first couple of weeks, and then we saw Jake Browning come in, and that just wasn't a real offense. As soon as Joe Flacco showed up, Chase Brown just returned to form as a guy who was gobbling up targets, breakaway runs, touchdowns. Joe Burrow comes back later in the season. Chase Brown just continues that. I mean, when we're talking 18.9 points per game, which is what he scored, I mean, on a per-game basis, he was the RB3. Jahmyr Gibbs and Christian McCaffrey were the only players to outscore Chase Brown over the second half of the season. So I find myself right now, the toughest decisions I have in these drafts that I'm doing is when I'm picking at the end of round 1 and when I get into the top of round 2 and I'm sitting there looking at Chase Brown, Omarion Hampton, Drake London, and Brock Bowers. I feel like all of those players should be going in round 1. And there's a lot of times that I will do that where I'll just take Drake London at like the 109 and then take whoever's still standing at the top of round 2. Like these to me feel like players that are just undervalued right now, but Chase Brown is the one specifically that I think I don't know why. I think it's just the early season struggles that he had last year. But like Chase Brown could easily be a top 3. He could easily be the top scoring running back in fantasy this year.
Well, I'm not there on him easily being the top scoring running back in fantasy, just because I think structurally the rushing upside I don't think is. I think he's going to be doing very well to break 1,000 yards rushing when it comes down to it. And we did see the involvement in the passing game, and that was the biggest change for him, of moving away from allowing him to be on the field when they're implementing the passing game instead of having Samaje Perine run out there as the personal protector. And that window, so week 9 through week 12 last year, Perine was out, and they just gave every single snap, every single opportunity to Chase Brown. Perine came back as the season got on towards the end of the year, and so that is if we can see that, I've got him projected at 90 targets in my projection for 70
Wow.
receptions and nearly
Mm.
450 receiving yards. So he's getting there in total yards for sure. He's getting 1,500 total yards when it comes down to it. But around the goal line, the rushing volume to have be the number one overall score. There's too many, like 90 targets feels like an absolute gangbusters production on his involvement there. Whereas we saw Christian McCaffrey, the number one running back overall last year, have 100 receptions. So it's not even
Mm.
90 targets. And so I think when it comes down to it, what Chase Brown is asked to do within this scheme, I think you have elements of the short passing game going to Jamar Chase that steps in a little bit for the running back involvement. So while there's not a clean second running back here, I think Chase is a proxy. Getting him involved in the short area of the passing game steps in a little bit for that rushing game.
And I think the weird thing with Chase Brown, too, is I felt like the meat that was left on the bone last year was with the breakaway runs, because we saw when he was at Illinois, we saw his rookie season, it was like all breakaway runs. Like, that's how he got his points, was ripping off these huge chunk plays. And then that didn't happen as much last year. He was able to offset it with the passing. But I feel like, we have yet to see that season where he's getting the pass catching work and the breakaway runs simultaneously. And I feel like that's where he could really break fantasy football. And we talked about this last offseason, that he said that was like his biggest thing that he wanted to improve on, that he was working with wide receiver coaches to become a better route runner and a better pass catcher. So I feel like now that he has that skill set, now he can focus a little bit more on the conditioning and the speed that made him such an explosive player early in his career. I mean, when I say easily the RB1, obviously we're not drafting him ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson, but when I look at a guy who catches passes, scores touchdowns, hits breakaway runs, and is on a high-scoring offense, I mean, there isn't a box that Chase Brown doesn't check for what you want to see in a running back that you're drafting in fantasy.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And really, so often it comes down to hunting opportunity on a good offense at the running back
Yeah.
position. And Chase Brown has ample opportunity, and he's definitely on a good offense.
Jamar Chase, the wide receiver one, end of discussion. Do we need to
Do
say
we want to
anything
talk about
else? I mean,
backup running backs at all that we've?
yeah, I mean, we can talk. I'm still holding it down for Taj Brooks every now and then, sprinkling in around 20 Taj Brooks here and there. I do think, though, that if something were to happen to Chase Brown, we'd probably see a split where it would probably be Taj Brooks getting some of the early down stuff, Samaje Perine coming in on passing downs. I don't think that there's any player that would step into the role that Chase Brown holds.
No, but again, Samaje Perine is playing anyways with Chase Brown on the field.
Right.
And that's where I think it's so. I think Taj Brooks is an interesting entry point to just backup running back conversation in general, because I think when you look at ADPs of backup running backs, the guys that the starter got hurt last year and they got some opportunity go at the very top. And then the guys that the starter stayed healthy last year and didn't get opportunity are at the very back end. I mean, if you're one of the people that's like the curse of 370, the curse of 400, or you're looking at year to year trends, usage, it feels like maybe you should be flipping these clear backup running backs and kind of say, like, the guy that was completely healthy for 17 games last year as the starting running back
Yeah.
and took on all this wear and tear
Mm-hmm.
relative to the backup that didn't get the opportunity. Like, what are the odds that does break to allow for some opportunity for, again, Taj Brooks, I think, is a really, really underrated piece in there. And, if you 20th round, 18th round, might be on dynasty waivers in your league. And so those are the type of players that you want to look for.
Goldfish brain, Jeff. What happened last year? I can't think beyond that. I can't remember the draft from 2 years ago. Like, what happened last year? We saw this guy. No, I mean, that's just, I think what it is, like, recency bias really does plague everybody who is playing this game to some extent. But wide receivers, again, like, we need to talk about him, but Jamar Chase, I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson ahead of him, and then Jamar Chase is just the easy 103 off the board. Like, if I've got a top 4 pick this year and I'm guaranteed one of Bijan, Gibbs, Chase, or Puka, I'm feeling fantastic about that. Like, I don't even have to think, just fill up my queue. Whoever falls into my lap, I'm happy with. T. Higgins, I could make the argument that he's a little bit overvalued, but still his role in this offense. I mean, we saw him catch did he have a touchdown like every home game last year? He was just automatic last year. Like it just felt like he was scoring every single time he was in Cincinnati, and I felt like we finally saw that upside realized for T. Higgins. So it would be foolish to knock him down in rankings now that that upside we've been chasing for years has finally shown itself. So I look at where Jamar Chase is going. I look at where T. Higgins are going. I think that they're valued perfectly fair, and I don't really know what to say about them that hasn't been said.
A.J. Brown or T. Higgins?
I'm going A.J. Brown pretty easily there.
Zay Flowers or T. Higgins?
Zay Flowers.
Garrett Wilson or T. Higgins?
Let me look at my rankings. Garrett Wilson.
I don't think it's worth asking Nico Collins. This is definitely
Collins
made me realize, there's a lot better wide receivers in the NFC than there are in the AFC. I'll just say that. But like the good receivers that we've talked about already, I mean, DJ Moore would be like the only other, and you're taking T. Higgins over DJ Moore. So I think as you break it down, it's one of those that I always feel so torn on T. Higgins because the production is definitely there with Jamar Chase in the lineup, but to some extent, you're selecting him on the chance that Jamar Chase isn't in the lineup to really realize the overall upside in the ceiling. And we just got done with a long Zay Flowers conversation, and there's not anything like that in Zay Flowers' way to recognize to be a top 10 receiver. But T. Higgins, he can be a top 10 receiver. It's really, really hard for him to be a top 5 receiver unless Jamar Chase is out of the lineup.
So speaking of contingent upside, the last player we'll talk about in this offense, Mike Gesicki is going pretty overlooked in drafts. You don't even see him getting drafted in most like 20-round best ball drafts. You could probably check your dynasty waivers right now, and Mike Gesicki is out there. There was a lot of legitimate steam for Mike Gesicki last offseason because we saw him step into that contingent role in 2024 where he was given us top 5 upside. Cold water was thrown all over that when they brought in Noah Fant, and then Noah Fant was just on the field for an annoying amount of snaps, playing about 40% of the snaps last year. So now with Noah Fant out of the picture, we should be going back to the same thesis that we had early last offseason for Mike Gesicki, where it's like, this guy probably isn't going to be super involved, but he'll be on the field often. He's going to get those snaps out of the slot every now and then, and if T. Higgins or Jamar Chase is to miss any time, then he's the number 2 option in the passing game. But why is it that people have just completely forgotten about Mike Gesicki, Jeff?
Well, for all the talk about going to 13 personnel, the Bengals have a lot of tight ends. They do run a lot of 2 tight end sets, but at the same time, this is still kind of, I see the offense that the way that it's structured is kind of more the Sean McVay tree from when they had Cooper Kupp, and they want to have 3 receivers on the field at all times instead of more. I think last year we saw kind of proof of concept of a full year of Mike Gesicki and wondering, can he be that full-time slot player? They just like Andre Yoshivas way too much. And it lacks the contingent. Andre Yoshivas is like the Alan Lazard here, where he's a good blocker. He's got some explosion, but even when the opportunity's there, the volume's not really there,
he's
but
still who he is.
Still on the field. And so I think what they can do with Joe Burrow's comfort level of what the personnel that he prefers to see, but also the spacing that they can create and the ability to bring Jamar Chase or bring T. Higgins into the slot and utilize that, moving those guys around the field quite a bit. They think that they need the Andre Yoshivas, the ability outside, or the blocking that he brings, the potential downfield that he carries. And so that's where my hang up on Gesicki overall is I don't see, again, absent the contingent outside that you mentioned, I don't see him as a player that has a path to being on the field every down, more or less. He's a situational player, and the situations that you can put him into your lineup, and it's when one of the 2 receivers are out, he becomes that secondary target. But when everybody is healthy, they cycle through the tight ends, they like to play the blocking tight ends, and they like to have 3 true receivers on the field.
And I think that's it with Gesicki. I don't think you're drafting him with the intention that he'll be a player that you can start on a week in and week out basis, but it's like, if T. Higgins misses time, then you start seeing like T. Higgins like production from Mike Gesicki, where he is just running a route on almost every single play out of the slot and demanding a lot of targets. And we saw that stretch in 2024 where he was very productive in that role. But I think that's about it for the Bengals, Jeff, unless you got any final thoughts here.
No, I mean, we started off talking about the clean offense, the easy to project offense. We know where the targets are going to go. The thing of it is, though, it's an offense you have to be in on it early, otherwise you've missed completely. If you don't go with the Jamar Chase in round 1, if you don't go Chase Brown in round 2, if you don't go T. Higgins in round 3, then you're looking at either a completely unstacked Joe Burrow, who's he doesn't have the rushing that of like a Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, where you're kind of okay with him being unstacked, or you are just placing that late dart on a Taj Brooks or on a Mike Gesicki. I don't like, Yoshivas still gets drafted, but we've seen opportunities and it just hasn't really been there for him. And there's just not really that other piece. I do think, talking about the tight ends, I'm curious to see if Eric All can either stay healthy or if Jack Andrus, the player they drafted this year out of Texas, can kind of step into there. But you're still going to get Drew Sample. You're still going to get Tanner Hudson. Those are players that the coaching staff has trust in, that just kind of do the right thing, but it never, I just think you're going to get a hodgepodge and players struggling to separate themselves.
This might sound crazy, Jeff, but I think on this show, the team that I'm most excited to talk about is the Cleveland Browns. And maybe I'm just too deep in the weeds. Maybe I'm just an absolute sicko, but I like the coaching changes. I like some of the players that they brought in this year. We'll talk through all of it, but let's start with the changes, of course. They brought in Todd Monken to be the head coach. Offensive coordinator Travis Switzer brought in Jerome Ford, the only notable loss in free agency. They brought in Tylan Wallace and Jack Stoll, but their draft is where they really made some splashy moves. 24th overall, they took Casey Concepcion. At the top of round 2, 39th overall, they brought in Denzel Boston. Pick 170, one of my favorite tight ends in this class, Joe Royer. They brought in Taylon Green as well, just a sparked up, really, really fun quarterback. And then a Matt Waldman favorite at the very end of round 7, they got Carson Ryan. So this is one like, I feel like this is just like a football guys type of draft. Like these are a lot of like our guys, like staffers really, really like these guys, and they all ended up going to Cleveland. Now, I can see this going one of two ways, right? Like this is a team that some people think doesn't really have an identity right now and that they just went out and kind of took BPA, but I do see an identity here. And like, maybe I am just a sucker for Todd Monken, but like I see the offenses that Todd Monken has coached dating back to his time at Georgia and then what he did in Baltimore. And I see a lot of pieces in this offense that can fill similar roles to other offenses that he's found good success with here. Am I just crazy for buying in on the Cleveland Browns, Jeff?
I mean, they're intriguing. So I definitely think they're cheap. So they have that going for them. And I mean, those are the two biggest things that I've got. It's polar opposite of the Bengals, where we're talking about if you want Bengals, you got to be done round 3 or 4. Otherwise, you're not getting Bengals. Browns, you get them anytime you want them. They're always going to be on the board. But ambiguity is what is the major question, I think, as you look throughout this lineup and really kind of absent probably the running backs and the tight ends, obviously. But there's ambiguity at the quarterback position, ambiguity at the wide receivers. And so our fantasy mind, we like to solve puzzles. We like to try to figure out how this is going to break. And we like undervalued players. And ambiguity gives all of those things in spades.
So let's talk about the quarterback position, because I think this is kind of where it all starts here. We've been, I mean, you and I, Jeff, we've been saying since October, like, Deshaun Watson's available in your dynasty leagues. Go pick him up right now. Like, just absolutely left for dead over the last couple of years, and for good reason. Like, he has looked terrible. We haven't seen a good Deshaun Watson since 2020, but now we're starting to get these good reports. He just came out today, Wednesday, June 10th, saying that he feels the healthiest he has felt since 2023. He said he's 100%. Said the Achilles feels good. Now we're getting all of these reports from national reporters and Cleveland beat writers, all saying that it appears like Deshaun Watson has the inside track. If you look at who's getting the majority of the first team reps, it's Deshaun Watson. But they also asked Todd Monken today, they said, are you ready to declare a QB1? And he said, I'm not going to have that answer at the end of minicamp. We're going to let this play out through training camp. So he's still keeping it an open competition, but we're seeing Deshaun Watson getting about 2 times as many of the first team reps as Shedeur Sanders. So they're still keeping a light on for Shedeur Sanders. But at this point, do you think there's any chance Sanders starts week 1? Or does it really, I mean, maybe I'm just biased because I have been drafting a lot of Deshaun Watson, and I have a lot of Deshaun Watson on my dynasty rosters. But to me, it sure seems like the stars are kind of lining up for Deshaun Watson to at least get first crack at the job. Whether he maintains it for 17 games, who knows? But I expect to see him out there week 1.
Yeah, and I think that's just, if you're managing this locker room, if you're like foundationally, if you're managing this quarterback room and you're looking at, the Shedeur Sanders of it all, and Deshaun Watson, and where Watson's coming from mentally, your new coach, you're stepping in here, and there's probably to some level you want to put Sanders in his place more or less, or make sure that like if you were to go to him, that he's bought in, that you can trust him to be the leader in that regard. And to the other side of it, you're really having to build up Deshaun Watson quite a bit. You want to support him. You want him to feel like he can do it again, that he could that he can find it again. And that's, I mean, you're looking foundationally at the best possible outcome for the Browns. The best possible outcome for the Browns would be Deshaun Watson wakes up and realizes it's 2021 all over again, and you're getting the player that you sold your entire franchise for, and it just clicks and it runs with it. The next best solution is Shedeur Sanders being the guy that we saw through good stretches of last year, and kind of really taking that job and running with it. And then the other solution outside of like the lightning striking of Taylor Green being the uber athlete that puts it all together, is you're positioned to draft your quarterback that you want next year. And so I think that's, if you're exploring the way to approach that, you're wanting to build up Deshaun Watson. You're wanting him to believe. You're wanting him to be bought in. You're wanting him to try to have that chance to find the magic again. And on the other side of it, you don't want Shedeur Sanders coming like feeling like he's running the show. Basically, that everybody doubted me. I proved them all wrong. Great year last year. This is my team now. And I think that the way that the reports and the way that the conduct with Sanders is, to some level, hey, I'm the coach, you'll follow me.
So what is the upside for Deshaun Watson when you look at this team with Harold Fannin, Quinshon Judkins, Casey Concepcion, Denzel Boston, Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman? Like, they have some legitimately good pieces here, or at least intriguing pieces, I should say. If Deshaun Watson can go out there, and he's always been he's not like an elite rusher by any means, but he's good enough to get, you can get 400 or 500 rushing yards from Deshaun Watson coming off the Achilles at his age. Maybe not that, but let's say you can get Deshaun Watson to the 350, 400 rushing yards, a handful of rushing touchdowns, and then he's able to facilitate this Todd Monken offense with all of these pieces in there. I mean, am I crazy for thinking that there's like legitimate top 10 upside in this offense?
No, I don't think you're crazy at all. And we saw defensively, Myles Garrett is gone. And what's the pieces defensively? So, I mean, there's a chance that this is an offense that's in shootouts, that Casey Concepcion and Denzel Boston recognize basically first round value, return that. Harold Fannin continues to step forward and is a guy that should be in the conversations with Colston Loveland and everybody else at the top of the position. And Jerry Jeudy turns the clock back to the very, very strong end of 2024 that we saw. And so like all those pieces click. Sure. The player that is facilitating all of it does have that potential upside. If we're talking about the most potential rosiest outcome for the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah. And if we're looking at the quarterback with the most upside, I mean, I think just like for fun, like if they just get to a point in the season where, Deshaun Watson isn't doing it, Shedeur Sanders isn't doing it, like, would there be anything more fun than just like picking Taylor Green up off of waivers and like playing him in super flex in the fantasy playoffs? Because like that's a guy, you look at Taylor Green. I mean, who was his closest athletic comp, Jeff? Do you remember this? The closest relative athletic score?
Anthony Richardson.
the closest quarterback athletic comp was Anthony Richardson. The closest overall athletic comp was Calvin Johnson. I mean, this guy is just like an absolute freak of nature. If he can go out there and just the rushing alone, like he could be a lot of fun in fantasy. But still a very mercurial quarterback room. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if we see 3 quarterbacks start at some point this season. But let's talk about Casey Concepcion. And I mean, we really could talk about this whole passing attack at once. Like, it's a very crowded passing attack. I expect that Cedric Tillman probably gets traded at some point. Kind of the same conversation we were having about Kayshon Boutte, where it's just like there's new players that are in, and now all of a sudden he's kind of squeezed out, but there might be some value on the trade market. I wouldn't be surprised to see Tillman get traded. Maybe Jeudy gets traded if a team out there is interested. But when I look at this core of Harold Fannin, Casey Concepcion, and Denzel Boston, like, they could be cooking with gas there. Like, that trio alone, you can build a very prolific passing attack around that trio if they all hit the high-end range of outcomes. Like, they are very complementary pieces. They are very fun, athletic pieces. And that's why I just, like, so many people have just kicked the Browns while they're down for so long and always talking about the worst-case scenario. And I'm just asking myself, like, what if this isn't the worst case scenario? Like, what if these guys are actually good? What if they do realize they had high end range of outcomes? Like, these are 3 players with pedigree who could end up being a very fun part of an offense.
Well, and to me, I think Jerry Jeudy's the discounted piece in all of it, because he's the proven veteran that you can basically get for free at the very end of the draft. And I don't think Isaiah Bond should be slept on either.
Yeah.
And I lived in Ohio my entire life. The Browns have largely been the local team for where I've lived my entire life. And I take every single bit of Browns reporting with a massive grain of salt, because I think that there's a lot of water carrying that happens for that organization when it comes to some of the beat that's covering there. But it sounds like Isaiah Bond is the player that is standing out in camp, but it's one of the situations that you're getting a different report of a different player that's standing out in camp. And you talk about the talent and ability and upside, it's there. That it could be very believable that there is a different receiver that's stepping up and standing out every single day in camp. But the reports that I have heard so far have Jerry Jeudy as the clear number 1 receiver, with the young players working in around him and showing out very, very well.
So I agree with you on that take, and I'm not going to push back too hard, because I think it's just, he's so cheap that, like, why not take the risk? I mean, now I'm wondering too, like, do I just go out and just try to buy Jerry Jeudy for some 3rd-round picks where I can, just to see in Dynasty? Because, like, I think a lot of people have just soured on him. But we want to talk about Harold Fannin as well, and it's kind of weird. Like, I feel like I've kind of gotten to this point where in early drafts we saw Tyler Warren and Harold Fannin were going like back to back in drafts, and then everything broke Tyler Warren's way, right? Like, Daniel Jones is trending in the right direction. They got rid of Michael Pittman, and then for Harold Fannin, we see that they bring in 2, 1st-round pick and early 2nd-round pick. We don't know who the quarterback's going to be. So now we have seen that ADP has kind of balanced itself out a little bit. Now I find myself where Harold Fannin's going a round and a half, 2 rounds after Tyler Warren. Now I'm starting to find myself liking this value on Harold Fannin again, because there is the out that even with all of these new pieces, that Harold Fannin is still just the best receiver in this offense, and that he just repeats exactly what he did last year.
I mean, that to me is really the key point that when breaking down this passing attack, and I've got him comfortably as the leading target earner on this offense. And it's a double-edged sword, because you think back to coming off 2024, the Jonnu Smith conversation. And it was really struggle targets with Jonnu Smith in Miami. It was a team that was just trying to get through the season and just get out the other side. And you could make the case that in 2025, the Harold Fannin involvement, that's what we saw, was an offense that was, Jerry Jeudy was off on Planet Jerry Jeudy, and the other pieces just weren't putting anything together. They're just trying to get out of the season, and they're just dumping it to Harold Fannin as a struggle there. And I mean, you could also make the case that the pieces don't click quite in the same way that they're supposed to, and this is an offense that's struggling, and they're just dumping it down to Harold Fannin. You can also make the argument Harold Fannin's just that good, that he's that good that dictates the offense moving through him. We talked about with Baltimore, the Todd Monken offense, the involvement. I mean, he's had Brock Bowers. He was Brock Bowers' coach. at Georgia. He's
Mm-hmm.
the offensive coordinator at Georgia, and moved Brock Bowers all over the formation, got him involved everywhere when he was at Georgia. I mean, there's a chance that Harold Fannin, a very good chance that Harold Fannin is easily the top target earner in this offense, that he should be mentioned comfortably ahead of Tyler Warren, that he should be mentioned with those tight ends at the very, very top. And so I think that I feel like the theme of this episode has been appealing ADPs, but I think Harold Fannin right now, he's a player that I find myself drafting quite a bit when I'm doing best ball drafts, because you're looking at him not only as one of the last departure points to have that tight end upside. I mean, you could be looking at him as the discount Brock Bowers, essentially.
And you could trace, and that's why I keep like, there's different types of coaches. And some coaches, they are going to look at their personnel and say, I'm going to build a game plan and an offensive system around the players that we have. And then you have other coaches where it almost seems like they want to go out and get guys that fit their system. And when I look at Todd Monken, like the offense that he had at Georgia, we talked about it, like the 12 personnel, where it was Brock Bowers and Oscar Delp there. And then he goes into Baltimore, and we see a lot of Mark Andrews.
Well, it wasn't Oscar Delp. It was Darnell Washington. We'll get there.
That's right. Yes, Darnell Washington. I'm sorry. Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers. And then we saw the 12 personnel really heavily in Baltimore when it was Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. But then they also had that receiver, the small, twitched-up guy who could move all over the formation, could take the little short plays and create after the catch, or could catch the ball downfield. That was Ladd McConkey at Georgia. That was Zay Flowers in Baltimore. And now I look at Casey Concepcion. And do you see that, Jeff? Like, obviously not one-to-one comps, but, like, would you say that Casey Concepcion is cut from the same cloth as a Zay Flowers and a Ladd McConkey? Because that's kind of my whole bullish take on Casey Concepcion, is that he can be that receiver, the guy who moves inside, outside, deep, short. You never really know what you're getting, just a guy that can win and beat you all over the field.
So I did the wide receivers for the rookie guide. Do you happen to know who my comp for Casey Concepcion was?
I don't, and I wish I remembered, but please tell me it was Ladd McConkey.
Stephon Diggs. So,
all right, yeah.
Very much a player that, and Diggs later in his career kind of is viewed more as a slot merchant, but I think that you flash early to his career, definitely could attack you vertically. And in the Minnesota days, definitely got downfield. And so I think that was my comparison for Casey Concepcion, as a player that early in his career, able to make big plays downfield, and then just a versatile, well-rounded player that became an underneath volume earner. And I think that that's very much in play for Concepcion. You look at foundationally the Todd Monken offense. He had Adonai Mitchell. He had George Pickens was at Georgia.
That's right.
So
yes.
These big,
that's kind of your Denzel Boston
outside. Yeah, play the ball downfield outside, and you have receivers that can play it outside, and Concepcion can do that, but Denzel Boston can do that as well. Cedric Tillman can do that, and so you've got pieces here for, it is, and I understand why you're fascinated with this team, because I was doling out targets to this team of. There's some teams, Baltimore, like, man, I have about 40% of target share left over that I got to put somewhere. And there's other teams that I'm like, man, I wish I had another 17% target share that I could assign to some of this. So,
and especially like you said, Sigmund Bloom and I, we talked about this briefly the day of the Myles Garrett trade, but Myles Garrett being out of the picture now, like, we have seen so many of these games, they were just low scoring offenses. One, because the offenses weren't great, but two, because like the defense was doing a lot of the work here. So now I think without Myles Garrett there, we could see more shootouts, which leads me to the running back discussion, Jeff. Quinshon Judkins, looked fantastic his rookie season until he suffered that injury. Sig made a pretty poignant point when we were talking through the Myles Garrett trade that if they find themselves in more shootouts, is that a negative for Quinshon Judkins? Like, if they aren't running out the game, like if they aren't in these tight games late, or could it be a positive for Quinshon Judkins where they maybe use him as that pass-catching running back? I mean, we might really be big-braining this here, but like if we're expecting the defense to give up more points, that would lead to a more aggressive offensive approach. Do you think that benefits or hurts Quinshon Judkins?
How often do you think the Browns were running out of lead last year, Dave?
Well, it wasn't even that. It was just that they were getting fewer opportunities on offense because the defense was doing so much of the work. Now, I think teams are just going to be able to just march down the field and I mean, there's nobody on defense that's going to really threaten them. Like, teams are going to be able to score at will against this defense.
I am trying to look something up here quickly because I have a hunch, but I do know from some of the FC eliminator scoring that I ended up with the Browns punter because the Browns had more drives than most teams. The Browns had plenty of opportunity. I think the Browns probably be surprised to look at the overall total offensive plays, but I think they were towards the league leaders in offensive plays, but then it didn't go anywhere. And so I think that it's, and they were playing from behind already. And I do think that, the Todd Monken of it, the Baltimore that we talk about it, I think you can make a case that you could see Quinshon Judkins in the Derrick Henry role. You could see Dylan Sampson in the Justice Hill role, and you could see Baltimore's run a pretty strict, like close to 50-50 snap share split for a lot of Monken's time as offensive coordinator between Henry and Justice Hill, with Hill taking the passing down. Now, he hasn't been overly involved in the passing down work, but he's still taking the snaps. That being said, Justice Hill, Derrick Henry is obviously Derrick Henry, and
Right.
that's really good there. And so I think that that's, for me, I'm breaking it down as if Dylan Sampson is more of the lead pass receiving back, but
I mean, this
Quinshon
is the guy we saw
Judkins just
pull 8
has,
targets in his NFL debut. Like,
yeah.
that's what he does, is pull targets. I think that's probably the only thing he does really well in the NFL. Like, he's not a between the tackles guy, but he is a very, very good pass catcher.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I've got over 300 rushes allocated to Quinshon Judkins, so a pretty heavy volume in the rushing attack going to Quinshon Judkins. But to say, I mean, it wasn't for lack of opportunity, lack of trying to like get into games last year. It was just that the offensive ceiling was so low that they weren't pushing in the same way as, like, you're thinking of a back and forth capability. There's a capability question that calls into play on offense in order to be involved in back and forth shootout games. And so, as much as there's concern with the defense, like, it's more that the offense just wasn't good enough, that they weren't put in position where they really had. And I do think that that's one of the things that we've seen across the league, is it seems to be more of a spread between just getting non-competitive games, and it's not like college where you got a non-competitive game and you start to get to the second string and you've still got dudes on Alabama going up against Southern Miss, and it's just going to be a difference. It's that teams just want to get out healthy, and so they don't keep the pedal down, and they just build the lead and they kind of sit on the ball. And when you got Myles Garrett on the other side, it to me, it's less the Myles Garrett of it, and it's more, is the offense capable of pushing to be in these back and forth game scripts overall. And if they do have the capability, that's obviously a very good thing for Quinshon Judkins, because you're finishing drives with points, you're moving the ball. Even if it is trailing in that position, you're still looking at an offensive infrastructure being higher, being better than just a team that you're able to just run the clock out, because you have no fear at all that offense is going to do much of anything to you.
And I will say, I've warmed up to Quinshon Judkins a lot. I was kind of scared off by the injury early, but we've been getting nothing but positive reports. I mean, he looks great when he's running his footwork drills and all that. I mean, he looks darn close to 100%. We're still months away from the season kicking off. So he's kind of become that, we've talked so much about David Montgomery on this show with you and with Joey Wright, and just about everybody on Football Guys is in on David Montgomery. But I've kind of been using Quinshon Judkins as like my backstop, where like when I see David Montgomery on the board and my picks coming up, like I'll throw David Montgomery in the queue, and then I'll put Quinshon Judkins in right behind him. And I kind of feel okay if I miss out on Montgomery. I feel like Judkins is a guy that you're getting a discount on because of the potential injury, but like his ceiling is just as high as any other running back that you're getting. Obviously he has some of the concerns of a dead zone running back, being on a bad offense, coming off of the injury, but every year we see a handful of guys thrive out of that dead zone, and I think Judkins is one of the guys that I would be happy to take there. So anything else, Jeff, on the Browns?
Well, we've got a little bit of space relative to where we've been running. So you've tickled my fancy there a little bit on talking about a dead zone running back, because to me, I don't see dead zone running back at all with Quinton Judkins. Again, I'm projecting
bad
300 carries.
offense.
Volume is
Bad
certainly
offense,
there.
lack of pass catching. I think that's it. Not the old dead zone running back, but that's how he could be dead zone, because we're projecting volume on a guy who could be a part of an offense where he gets 3 goal line touches and 15 targets, and it doesn't matter how many carries you're getting. I mean, like Nick Chubb was almost a dead zone running back his entire career because of that same problem. Like they weren't scoring and he wasn't catching passes. We know he was a great running back. He was getting 100% of the running back touches, but there were just so few valuable touches that it didn't really matter.
To me, dead zone running back is you've selected a player who basically lost his job. But you selected a veteran that you projected, like the classic Toby Gerhart goes to Jacksonville coming off of a strong year in Minnesota and looks like he's going to be the prime guy, and then Chris Ivory just takes the job. That's what I think of dead zone running back. I think that sure, you can make the case that the ceiling is just low enough that even the volume is not pushing to get him into your lineup. But I think you can also make the case that, like we just talked about, where the ceiling, like you can make a top 12 running back case for Quinton Judkins. And I think that's, to me, like it's a lot cleaner than what I think of a typical dead zone running back. A dead zone running back, I mean, like Bashal Tutin to me is a dead zone running back. We talked about that a little bit on the Jacksonville episode of, there's a chance that Chris Rodriguez has early down, has goal line work. Quinn Allen has passing down work, and you just can't even put him into your lineup. Like, sure, the ceiling might be lower on Judkins, the Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis of it all, of like the passing game's not there. But I think that one of the things that I really like Adam Harstad's theory of basically like being wrong in the right direction, more or less. And I think right now we're drafting Quinton Judkins as if he's going to a bad offense. He's not going to get passing down work. Sure, he should get volume, but the potential bull case is there for Judkins, especially at his ADP, that maybe he does get passing down work. Maybe he is the overall feature back. Maybe he is a top 12 running back. And that's, I think, that where you're able to get Quinton Judkins. To me, there's a pretty clear split when Judkins is off the board on players that you're stepping into a timeshare, more or less, when Judkins is off. Whereas Judkins sits as the last remaining, there's a chance this guy is bell cow all the work.
David Montgomery was the last remaining, and now I've extended that out, like another 3 picks to Quinton Judkins. Like now he is a part of that like last remaining before the fall off.
Yeah. But if you wanted to go the direction of, it wouldn't be a true 0 RB build. If you wanted to recognize the way that running backs are going off the board early and hammer 3 wide receiver picks and then turn around and grab David Montgomery and Quinton Judkins, I mean, there's a possibility that you got a very, very good fantasy team off that start.
And I have done quite a few of those. That's actually like my ideal start this year. If I could go wide receiver, Bowers, wide receiver, Montgomery, Judkins, feel pretty good about that start. Like that feels like I've locked in some foundational pieces there. But I think we've talked enough about the backfield. And I think we've talked about basically all the receivers. We didn't talk a ton about Joe Royer. I mean, I still, I like Joe Royer, but that draft capital was pretty damning. I think we need to see him.
Story about Joe Royer's girlfriend.
Joe Royer's girlfriend? No, let's hear some Ohio lore here.
You don't know the story. So it's my understanding that Joe Royer's girlfriend is the daughter of the tight end coach at Cincinnati, where Royer was playing. And there is some debate about what age this relationship started with Joe Royer's girlfriend, that she might have been not quite 18 when college Joe Royer started dating this girl. So that's out there, deep interwebs.
I won't touch that, but see a quick Google search will tell you everything you need to know about that one, and we will let you, the
This
listeners...
is what you get. This is what you get when you the divisional previews of the
if that's
deep
not
interwebs.
If that's not how you put a bow on the Cleveland Browns conversation right there, I think that's it. But Jeff, any final takeaways here? I know you always have a very good way to just like succinctly wrap up the teams that we're talking about.
Well, I mean, started talking about with the Browns here, the ambiguity and the situations. We know ambiguity breeds value, and I think there's a lot of potential value to recognize off the Cleveland Browns. And I think one of the other things to talk about is Raheem Sanders. And Raheem Sanders, to
Ooh.
me, it feels very, very forgotten about. But we know Quinshon Judkins is already injured, and there's a chance that Raheem Sanders, like Judkins, has a setback or happy land. Judkins goes and does something else. I mean, right now I'm only projecting the Browns to carry 3 backs, and there's really not another back that I think that's going to be pushing for a spot. And I mean, Raheem Sanders is a guy that's out there in very, very deep leagues. He's sitting on waivers in very deep leagues, and there's a path where you're getting some good volume off Raheem Sanders. So just a deep, deep under the radar cut there, I think.
I think one of my favorite like trivia facts that I'll be able to use decades from now is like in that loaded 2025 NFL running back class, who was the first running back to score a touchdown? And everybody's going to, oh, it's got to be Ashton Jeanty or Marion Hampton or no, Cam Scatabo got off to a hot start. Wait, Quinchon Raheem Sanders, first rookie running back to score a touchdown last year. Good guy. Like he's a good player. He was with, remind me, I think he was with the Chargers early in the offseason last year. And then they released him and he went to the Browns. But yeah, just a prolific college career. Rocket Raheem, just a fun player. And I'm glad you mentioned him because we would have just ended talking about the Browns without mentioning his name, and definitely worth a look in your deep dynasty leagues. On to the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jeff, the last team in the AFC North. Another team that has gone through quite a bit of change. You know off the top of your head, I probably should have prepped before. I think fourth coach, right? Mike McCarthy now is the fourth coach in Steeler history. Is that it?
Boy, they've only had 4 coaches in their history. I mean, I can only think of like 3 for sure. But
look it up. Look it up. As I'm going through the changes here, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Mike McCarthy. It's either the 4th or 5th Steelers coach in NFL history. I mean, this is not a position that's open all that much. But we saw Mike Tomlin is out. Mike McCarthy is
he's
in
had
as the head
16
coach.
head coaches, Dave. They have 4 Hall of Famers.
I think it's since the merger. Then is what it is. It's like something. It's like the last 3. I'm trying to think. It's something crazy. They've had like 3 coaches in 65 years or something wild like that.
So
yeah, I mean,
Chuck
if we're
took
going
over
back to
in 1969. So
yeah.
So prior to Chuck Noll, they this the hot seat. I mean, this is like they were moving through guys like Al Davis moves through guys. But then in 1969, they started had Chuck Noll until 1991, then Cowher from 92 to 06, and then Tomlin from 07 to 25, and then now Mike McCarthy.
That's a prestigious role. I mean, that is something like they don't make this change all that often. So we assume that McCarthy's probably going to be there for some time. This isn't a team that just rotates through head coaches. They stick through them in thick and thin. But with Mike McCarthy, he brings offensive coordinator Brian Angelicio. I think I said that one right. And a lot of changes to personnel. Players lost. Skylar Thompson, Kenneth Gainwell, Calvin Austin, Jonnu Smith, and Connor Hayward. They added Mike Pittman via trade, Brandon Johnson, Rico Dowdle, Travis Homer. Actually, this is outdated. They just let Brandon Johnson go a couple of days ago, so nix that. Draft picks. They got Jeremy Bernard in round 2, Drew Aller in round 3, Caden Wetjen, a wide receiver on day 3, tight end Riley Nowakowski, and then in round 7, Eli Heidenreich, a fun little wide receiver, running back, hybrid type of player there. Also, I'm just going to add because I love it, they extended Darnell Washington. Gave him a long-term contract, so still just 24 years old. He got himself a nice deal. I see you smirking and nodding, Jeff. We're going to talk about tight ends when we talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. But let's start with the quarterback like we always do. What does Aaron Rodgers still have left in the tank, Jeff?
I mean, I'm somebody that I think Rodgers wasn't. I mean, you look statistically, Rodgers wasn't as bad, I think, as the general perception of Rodgers was last year. I mean, they made the playoffs. They won the division that includes the Bengals and the Ravens. So there's that. I mean, it's Aaron Rodgers. It's not the discount double check Aaron Rodgers that is able to extend plays and attack vertically down the field. What might be left in the arm is a significant question. It's more of the like Peyton Manning when he was throwing the lollipop balls, but he knew exactly what the defense was going to do type of now role for Aaron Rodgers. And I think the overall question is, what can Mike McCarthy, I mean, Mike McCarthy knows Aaron Rodgers very well, but he knew a different Aaron Rodgers, and Mike McCarthy's offense throws the ball a lot more than Arthur Smith's offense threw the ball. And I think that the Steelers threw the ball a lot more than the expectation was last year with Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. And so I think overall, when you're looking at volume, I mean, there's Rodgers is like completely forgotten about, and he's like quarterback 32 overall. And I think that the fantasy scoring doesn't really match the perception and general fading of Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and I think that there's, other reasons. People just like the whole personality of Aaron Rodgers. I almost said the word enigma. It's just like I feel like that Netflix documentary just like coerced me into calling him an enigma without even realizing it. But like he is a larger than life. Like it's not just the quarterback on the field that people analyze. Like when they talk about Aaron Rodgers, it's all the baggage and everything else that comes with him. But like, yeah, I think that he was pretty good last year and he has changed. I think the biggest thing, like you mentioned, there's very little threat of a long ball. Like we would see every once in a while where he would like crow hop to like get the ball 35 yards downfield to Calvin Austin, and that was about the deepest shot that we saw. I remember him connecting once with DK Metcalf on a deep shot when DK Metcalf was just like wide open. I think it was a London game, but like it's not something we saw a lot of. And then I think on top of that too, the limited mobility, because Rodgers was kind of like the predecessor to the Mahomeses and all those guys where he was able to extend plays, spinning out of the pocket, doing all that sort of stuff. And without that in his tool bag now, that's why we saw over the second half of the season, he realized like I can't do this anymore. And he stopped taking those sacks. And rather than trying to spin around and then taking the sack, it was just, I'm just going to dump down to Kenneth Gainwell. And I'm just going to spam this over and over and over again. And I'm just going to keep hitting Kenneth Gainwell. And that's going to be my new move. But now I think when I look at the personnel that they brought in, Michael Pittman is an immediate separator who can be that quick target. So now instead of having to check down to a Kenneth Gainwell, you can just immediately, if you've got an edge rusher coming at you, you can just fire the ball to Michael Pittman and he's going to be open immediately 9 times out of 10. I think that they've done a good job kind of building an offense around Aaron Rodgers to kind of work around his shortcomings. And I just see like this, to me, it feels like a very it just feels like an old Packers team where you've got these two big-bodied, physical, muscular, strong at the catch point receivers, and you've got this Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers matrimony again. Like we've seen things like this before where people try to recapture old magic and it ends up just flaming out in embarrassing fashion. But I think that they're at least like doing the right things to set themselves up to have a potential run this year.
Yeah, and I understand like frustration with, I mean, you talk about the enigma of it. You talk about there's people that just don't like Aaron Rodgers. And I understand like you had Malik Willis in free agency. You had Kyler Murray out there. I understand there are definitely potentially more interesting paths forward to the Packers to have taken. But I'm going to drive the points per game people crazy here. But where do you think Aaron Rodgers finished at quarterback fantasy quarterback last year?
I'm going to say QB 16.
Close. It could be 18. And,
right.
At points per game, he wasn't that far behind a guy like Tyler Shuck.
I mean, he was still doing the Aaron Rodgers thing of like trying to spam touchdowns at the goal line. Like he could have handed it off, but he's like, no, I'm just going to throw a couple jump balls up to DK and he'll come down with one of them.
Exactly. And it was really, I mean, we've already on this episode talked about the Jonnu Smith struggle offense. I mean, the Kenneth Gainwell of it all was the struggle offense with Kenneth Gainwell of the inability to have a short rushing game or to have any level of a power rushing game turned into the short passing game being that offshoot of that rushing game. So I think it's one that, I mean, I certainly can understand why nobody wants to take Aaron Rodgers before quarterback 30. And he's a player that you're not even thinking about in one quarterback leagues, but in, dynasty leagues, superflex leagues, he's basically free and he could turn out a lot better than some other options that you're putting into that quarterback 2 spot or that quarterback 2.5, quarterback 3 spot.
So we already talked about the two main receivers, and no disrespect to Jeremy Bernard, but I really struggle to see him finding himself in a fantasy relevant role because we saw times last year, Jeff, where like they would go entire drives without a second receiver even stepping on the field, where it would just be like DK Metcalf and then a rotation of tight ends and running backs. So I think that bringing in Michael Pittman is kind of a departure from that mindset, but I still do think that when you look at how many tight ends and how many running backs they have and how versatile and complementary and different the skill sets are of these running backs and tight ends, do you expect it to be a pretty similar offense? Like, don't get me wrong, Jeremy Bernard's going to get on the field, but any hopes that this team is going to live in 11 personnel and have a full-time slot receiver, I think that just isn't going to happen. I think we're going to see Jeremy Bernard, Pat Fryermuth, Darnell Washington, Jalen Warren, like all of these guys kind of rotating in and out of the lineup.
It's interesting because to me, it strikes me as the gross version of Rodgers' last team, the Jets, where we had the episode when we talked about the Jets and having really 5 receivers or 5 pass catchers for 4 spots and rotating through. And I think that there's reason to think that they could live in 11 personnel because that's what Mike McCarthy has always done. He's always lived in 11 personnel. And so if you want to get there, but at the same time, I just saw today, Mike McCarthy said that Darnell Washington's playing so well and Pat Fryermuth has established himself so much that he's going to switch up tendency and he's going to play more 2 tight end sets. And that's, I think, foundational fundamentally. Having Fryermuth more as the big slot and the player that can be moved around and leaning into what Darnell Washington offers, I think that that's the best potential offense and usage of having those 2 outside receivers, DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman, along with the 2 tight ends and Bernard kind of just pitching in. But we talked about the overall feelings and thoughts with Aaron Rodgers. To me, I think DK Metcalf is very, very undervalued right now. He's a forgotten player when it comes down to it. When he's going off the board as, let's see, he's wide receiver 36 off the board. And where do you think he finished last year, Dave?
I mean, I can't imagine it was better than like wide receiver 28.
He was wide receiver 26 last year, but we also know that he was dealing with an injury, and he hit that injury right around the midpoint of the season. And through the first 8 weeks of the year, where do you think DK Metcalf was the first 8 weeks prior to picking up the injury?
Well, he had that huge game in London, and he also had some touchdown luck that cooled off a little bit. I remember there was a point in time where he was like a top 12 or top 15 receiver or something, but I was pretty unabashed in saying that you should sell DK Metcalf at that point.
Well, he got hurt, but he was wide receiver 15 in the first 8 weeks of the season. And you're getting him at wide receiver 36. And so to me, he is easy click when it comes around. I'm getting a lot of DK Metcalf because I'm just buying it. And I know that you are a DK Metcalf fader, and that's one that we have a difference of opinion on. But I think that a healthy DK Metcalf in an offense that's going to throw the ball quite a bit, and maybe it ends up being Michael Pittman. Maybe it ends up being Michael Pittman doing those. Remember the classic Devontae Adams wide receiver screen, like stiff arm a guy and do all that stuff. That could be Pittman too, or it could be both of them. And it could be a lot of volume going to both of the receivers, because what we've seen, while it has been 11 personnel offense, we think back to Mike McCarthy's days in Dallas of having CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper, or having 2 receivers that you had Michael Gallup there contributing, but it really was the 2 receivers at the top. And so I think that, you're getting Michael Pittman even later than DK Metcalf. And to me, this
year, it's a struggle for me to draft, because I could see, and I haven't looked at your projections, but I could easily see Michael Pittman just being the primary receiver in this offense and DK Metcalf kind of taking a back seat to him. I just think that when you look at the type of receivers who have found success with Aaron Rodgers historically, I think Michael Pittman really fits that bill better than DK Metcalf. Now, if we were talking a 24-year-old gunslinging Aaron Rodgers, then I'd be a little bit more excited about DK Metcalf. But I think at this point in his career, that more mature, just like getting the ball to that immediately open receiver across the middle of the field, I think Pittman does a lot of those things better than DK does.
I just
want to say, Jeff, we've been making content together for like almost 7 years now at this point, and we end up arriving to a lot of the same points on a lot of the same players just because we talk so much ball. I think DK Metcalf is the one player we have disagreed about our entire friendship and tenure working together.
Probably. He's definitely up there. It is fun.
George Pickens is taking the flame from DK now.
No, but I think that overall, both of them, it doesn't matter which one ends up being more of the top guy. I think they both can definitely deliver value on where their ADPs are sitting right now. And so that's the to me is the larger takeaway of there's potential value on both of them. And it is I just yeah, you're right. I think you're right on Jeremy Bernard. I understand the rookie fever and Randall Cobb and but we've never seen a rookie wide receiver matter at all with Aaron Rodgers. When you've got two very trusted, probably veteran receivers out there that projects very, very easily, I think the values on both DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman are very attractive right now.
And I also think that a lot of what Jeremy Bernard would do, Pat Fryermuth can do pretty well, kind of playing, out of the slot and going up the seam. You'd expect some of that from Bernard. And I think Fryermuth is he's such an underrated player, and I don't want to say underrated in fantasy because we've never really seen it all come together in fantasy. I think his best season ever was like tight end 16 or tight end 18 or something like that. But he's another one of those guys that is like foundational to the offense. Like he makes everything else work around him. He is so good as a run blocker. His threat in play action makes him so valuable when he's going down the seam that he's not going to be one of those guys that's ever going to be a 25% target share tight end. But I think that his role in the offense is just, so impactful everywhere else. So Pat Fryermuth, I mean, maybe there's like some contingent upside here if one of the receivers goes down or something like that. But if you had to, Jeff, and I know like if you're looking at median outcomes, Pat Fryermuth is going to project much better than Darnell Washington. But what we talk about, where like Pat Fryermuth kind of has this limited ceiling from what we've seen so far in fantasy, do you think there could be maybe a higher ceiling, like untapped upside for Darnell Washington that we should be discussing? Because we were just in a fantasy draft, a dynasty startup, I should say, and it was a tight end premium league. And I got Darnell Washington, 24 years old. I can't remember the exact round, but like it's very rare that the entire group chat is complaining about a snipe in like the late teen rounds. And when I took Darnell Washington, just about everybody was like, "Oh, that's who I wanted with my next pick." And it's just one of these guys that like gets overlooked by everybody, but then at the same time, everybody seems to be in on him.
It's the unicorn appeal. It's the mystery box of it's just fascinating because you just don't see players like him. And I did a show with Mike, our good friend Mike Kashuba, and that's out there. And we talked about Mike as a Steelers fan. We talked about the Steelers tight ends, and I'm very intrigued by Darnell Washington of just the potential overall upside. And when you look at it, why is he not on the field every single snap? Like to me,
conditioning maybe he's 311 pounds. He can't run
potentially, yeah. Maybe. I mean, but you basically get a free extra lineman. Plus, he has pretty soft hands. He can work up the seam, and he's a problem. We did the tight end episode talking about Tucker Kraft and the way that defensive backs get tired of seeing Tucker Kraft over and over again. How do you think they're going to feel? They're seeing Darnell Washington over and over again, crushing them on the backside of a rollout. And then all of a sudden they're just going to let him and release. And so I think it's fascinating. I think that Washington is just so rare. And this is a league, when it comes down to it, fundamentally is about rare players capable of doing things that not very many players can do. And Washington is definitely that type of player. And so so Mike McCarthy's very first Green Bay team, this is going to scratch a brain wrinkle potentially. Do you know who the tight end for Mike McCarthy's very, very first Green Bay Packers team was?
Was it Mercedes Lewis?
No, it was not Mercedes Lewis. He's definitely been in the league long enough that it could have been Mercedes Lewis, but Bubba Franks. And Bubba Franks was
another just guy. Like unicorn, yeah.
Yeah, Bubba Franks is a big tight end, and then McCarthy kind of moved to like the Jermichael Finley type tight ends, like more of the Fryermuth mold. But I think that when you're breaking it down fantasy wise, yes, the overall potential is there for Washington to be something we've never seen before, to be a player that you putting him out there every single snap because he just brings something different. But when you look at traditionally where tight ends operate, where fantasy points come from tight ends, Fryermuth definitely fits that mold more so of the player that can be kind of that big slot. He can create a little bit after the catch, can kind of do some of those things in the short to intermediate passing game to get some volume there relative to like Washington, yes, he could potentially be a problem after the catch, but he could also be one of those situations where he's just so big that he's getting the catch and you're just chopping out the ankles and he's down. And so that relative to a tight end that kind of has a lower center of gravity, just the ability to transition to a runner much quicker.
But I'll say, like, I haven't seen anybody who has successfully found out how to take Darnell Washington down so far. Like, yeah, I think, like, you know, logically, you say just chop out his ankles, but like we've seen people try to do that, and he just steps through guys and over guys, and will just drag a gang of guys with him. So yeah, I think like we still haven't seen it, and still, like I said, 24 years old. I think you see how big this guy is, and you just assume that he's just like this grizzled veteran, but like still growing into his paws, like still on the right side of the age curve. We can just see a continued ascension for Darnell Washington. Now let's talk about the running backs here, Jeff, and I'm going to ask some questions and see if you can kind of get to where I am leading you. Why do you think Caleb Johnson struggled to get on the field last year? Is there any specific reason?
Because he was drafted into a different offensive scheme. He was drafted to be a running back for a ball control power run game built around Mason Rudolph. And then he ended up in a Aaron Rodgers offense that he couldn't pass protect, and he was not built to operate in the offense that they were running.
There it is. Pass protection. That was like the big thing last year, and that's why we saw it. Jaylen Warren, fantastic pass blocker. Kenneth Gainwell, fantastic pass blocker. So I look at this right now, and I think that a lot of people just see Rico Dowdle stepping in, and they say, oh, he's the very clear, obvious guy that's going to get the early down work. He's going to step into that Najee Harris role. Am I crazy for having some of the same concerns? Because Rico Dowdle, like you look at the frame, you'd assume that he's a good pass blocker, but he statistically every single year grades out as a very poor pass blocker. So I kind of have the same concerns with Rico Dowdle that we had about Caleb Johnson last year, is that his pass blocking is going to hurt him and stop him from winning a role. Now, I know there's a connection with Mike McCarthy, so maybe there's some trust there with Mike McCarthy that we don't really understand, but I can't help but have this fear that Rico Dowdle is going to miss a couple blitzes, Aaron Rodgers is going to end up on his back, and that's all we're going to see of Rico Dowdle for the rest of the year.
Last year, Cooper Kupp goes to Seattle, and what's the most memorable play Cooper Kupp made as a Seattle Seahawk?
Probably sealing a block for Jackson Smith-Njigba.
Can you remember any play that Cooper Kupp made?
That's what I'm saying. It was probably him 40 yards downfield, pushing a defender out of bounds so JSN could walk a touchdown in.
But Clint Kubiak knew Cooper Kupp deeply. Cooper Kupp knew the exact scheme that they were implementing. Rico Dowdle was pretty blunt. It was I did a revenge game feature for the site, and then I did an episode with Joey. We're on the schedule release, our friend Joey Wright, and looked at revenge games, and it was fascinating because Dowdle, we know Dowdle's going to tell you what he thinks, and you got very savvy players in the media now that sometimes you have to read between the lines, and sometimes you got Rico Dowdle that comes out and says he was pissed that the Panthers didn't bring him back, that he was very good for the Panthers. He was very, very angry that the Panthers didn't bring him back because.
And he also talked about, like, last year in season before the Cowboys game, talked about how
said
mad
he was going to light the Dallas.
Yeah, like this guy lives with a chip on his shoulder.
Yes, but he in that and saying that he was upset with the Panthers, he said that basically he talked to McCarthy, and McCarthy was like, "Dude, I trust you. Come here and be the other back." And so that's where I think that there's a deep level of trust between McCarthy and Rico Dowdle, and he's not going to be the Cooper Kupp of it. He's not going to not have any memorable plays, but it is going to be the guy that, like Aaron Rodgers, knows the offense, knows the scheme. What do you think matters with Aaron Rodgers? A running back that knows exactly what he's supposed to be doing on that play? It matters probably a little bit with Aaron Rodgers relative to other quarterbacks. And so I think Dowdle, this, to me, it's, you talk about early down work. I think it's more kind of the Rams approach of just trading off series when it comes down to it, of having like the Kyron Williams gets 2 series, Blake Corum gets 1 series. I think that you're going to kind of get more of that between Dowdle and Jaylen Warren with them, or
if you're looking at
flashing
this, like,
back to
1-2 split, would you say Dowdle getting the 2 and then Warren getting the 1, or have that reversed?
Well, I think it's more 2-2. type of a split,
Okay,
or
fair.
more kind of later stage Ezekiel Elliott, Tony Pollard, because that was another backfield that Mike McCarthy had, and it got to the point where it was a pretty close to even split between Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott towards the end of Elliott's time, towards when McCarthy was still the coach in Dallas. And so I think that that's what you're going to get, and that's the way that I've got it broken out. I've got Warren slightly ahead in volume, but I think that you're going to get both these players being involved.
Last guy I want to talk about here, Jeff, and there are just so many like intriguing players on this offense. We talk about Darnell Washington being a unicorn because of his size and athleticism, but we've got another like opposite end of the spectrum unicorn in Eli Heidenreich, who is just a guy that played one of the most unique positions I've ever seen. When I was scouting him for the Football Guys Rookie Guide, I noticed like as I was watching, they kept calling him a snipe, which is a term I wasn't familiar with. They kind of made up their own role for him in this Navy offense, and you would see just the wildest usage. Like he would get press man coverage out wide, and he'd beat his man, and then he'd catch like a short out route, and then the next play he'd line up in the backfield, and he would just take a handoff up the middle, and then the next play he'd line up in line, and he would run a seam 45 yards downfield and catch the ball. I mean, there wasn't a single thing that they weren't asking him to do. So we were kind of joking throughout the whole rookie draft or rookie guide process, like you were covering wide receivers, I was covering running backs, and we kept sending him back and forth to each other. Like, no, he's a wide receiver. And you're like, no, he's a running back. And we just went back and forth and back and forth. And now even when you're drafting on best ball platforms, like if you're on Drafters, he is a running back. If you're on DraftKings, he is a wide receiver. Like nobody knows what to make of this guy. He was announced as a running back at the NFL draft, but you look at him and he's 6'1" and he can run crispy routes and he can beat man coverage. What does the NFL do with a player like this? Because clearly 32 other teams just decided they didn't want him. Every team passed on him for 6.5 rounds. The Steelers finally said enough is enough, and they took him. But, like, are there plans for this guy, or is he just going to be a fun story?
I don't want to. I mean, I lean toward the latter. I don't want to throw cold water on it. But,
I know.
Well, he is a fun story. He's a Pittsburgh guy. He was at the draft in his dress blues. The hometown Steelers drafted him. It is a very fun story. The production at Navy is unprecedented. So the production, fantastic. Then you see him with the pads on and see the other players around him. And you're like, yeah, there's not players like this in the NFL. And sometimes there are Darnell Washingtons that there's not players like this in the NFL. And sometimes there are the other end of the spectrum that there's not players like that in the NFL. And so but I don't want to just throw cold water because it's so fun. And it would be so awesome to see him really matter. And, we joke about the script writers, but to some level it's comes down. There's a reason why jokes about the script writers hit home, because as kismet, whatever it might be, like the stars align and allow for just unprecedented things that we wouldn't expect, way off of the radar, that come together and work out. And yeah, I think that like when you're looking at watching the tape and how's this going to fit and how does he do the things that what you see an NFL running back do, you're not checking very many boxes at all there when it really comes down to it. But then when you're looking at like just would it be the most shocking thing in the world that we're getting to week 18 and the Steelers need to score a touchdown and Eli Heidenreich just wiggles free and Aaron Rodgers hits him open and he scores the touchdown that puts the Steelers into the playoffs? I mean, that's the way
more
that
likely it'll come on like a
muffed
punt that he gets knocked into the end zone and he jumps on top of it. It's probably going to come on special teams more than offense,
yeah, well,
still a fun story.
Danny Woodhead or things like that of like it happens. Guys that just have football in their DNA and
to me, I think like the Philip Lindsay is kind of what I see, like a local kid who gets drafted to the team that he's a fan of, a late round pick. I don't think Eli Heidenreich is a guy that 10 years from now is going to be breaking records in the NFL, but I think that there's like enough juice here and a good enough narrative that, again, like how many guys have we put like that's a fun round 20 best ball pick tag on, and I think Eli Heidenreich kind of falls into that bucket.
we were out to dinner when Eli together in Denver,
Right.
well, in Colorado Springs when Heinrich was selected, and it was a moment. It was a true
It
moment
was.
of him getting called up on stage, and it's it's just one
They
of
they
like
milked it for like an hour on that broadcast.
yes, but there's like, and we've talked offline. I feel like I've been too cynical lately, and so like the cynical me is like that was just a made for TV moment of a guy
Yeah.
that it everybody in the NFL passed on him because they knew it was going to happen. The Steelers, the league, they said, "Hey man, you'll win the press conference if you do this move," and they did, and it was a great moment. That's the cynic in me. The other side is we have seen him do things that we just are very rare, and yeah, life works out. Life finds a way.
Well, any final thoughts on the Pittsburgh Steelers, Jeff, or just the AFC North that we have just spent the last hour and 45 minutes discussing as a whole?
I just love talking about football. I love the being able to project and being able to get in depth and not having to worry about hitting the marks and like doing these should do better. These should do better on YouTube. You should check this out. If you
I will
love
say
football,
they do really well on the podcast side. For whatever reason,
okay.
YouTube, I don't know, man. Like if you watch, like if you listen to like any YouTube guru, they'll say like never do a video longer than an hour. Like you got to end your video at 59:59, and I don't know, man. Rules are dumb. We're gonna do what we want.
Well, but it also just speaks to. I mean, we have a big push, and we really don't even need to have the big push because the way we're wired, I think, on but community with football guys, and to me, these are our opportunity. You and I opportunity. This is our one for us. And when it comes down to it, of being able to do this series and just being able to let it breathe, take our time, and just nerd out and get to the maximum level. And if you're listening an hour and 45 minutes into this third episode of doing this, you're our people and we appreciate you so much. We're here for you, man. And I think that it's, again, we talked about it's thoughts and pushes to be the community where you can feel like you're part. But it's true that me, you, Joey, Joe, Clayton, Bob, across the board, Sig, we know Sig, and like so across the board, everybody, Cecil, everybody you can think of, Dan Hendry, I mean Adam Harstead, everybody that you can think of is a welcoming, kind, genuine person. And if you're out there, we're here, we're your people. We love talking about football, and we love having this opportunity to be able to nerd out.
And I know there's a lot of regular listeners. I'm not going to name them all here, but you know, there's a lot of people who like I have become friends with the listeners of this show over the years too. Like people that DM me and hey, you know, I feel this way about this take that you had, or what do you think about this trade or something like that. And like that's probably the most gratifying part about doing this show is like knowing that it's just you and I talking right here, Jeff, but that we've got this group of people that are going to tune in and listen and then talk to us about the show. So we appreciate that. You know, Jeff, I keep my DMs open on Twitter. I don't know about yours these days. It's scary on Twitter, so I don't want to blame anybody for turning them off. But we've also got fantasy show at footballguys.com that you can email us. Of course, leaving us comments in the YouTube, leave us a review on Apple, however you want to connect with us. It does mean the world to us knowing that people are sitting here taking the time to listen to these shows.
Well, and I'm going to be this weekend. I'll be in Cincinnati at the Scott Fish Bowl Live. I know that you're going to be at the Denver Scott Fish Bowl Live.
2 weekends, yep.
Last year, I got the opportunity to do the Columbus Football Guys Bowl live event. I mean, we're talking already about at some point being in Las Vegas, and so say hi, like you're out there, like we love it, and we love you. We love the people, the community, and you really truly are the foundation.
I like this less cynical Jeff. We need more of this, Jeff. These are good Jeff Bell vibes. I really like this show today, but I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in. We talked about the AFC North today. As I said, we've already done the AFC East and the AFC South. For those keeping track at home, that means we have one more AFC episode left. We're a day late on today's episode coming out on Thursday, but we will be back on schedule tomorrow. I'm sure you can hear this frog in my throat. That's why we had to push this one back a little bit, but we'll be back on schedule with the AFC West coming out on Friday, and then next week we start with the NFC, so we'll have those 4 episodes coming out over the next 2 weeks. I want to thank y'all so much for taking the time to tune in. We'll see you soon.